Drivers, start your engines!
Pick the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him. He talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweater working for the man, alright. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Cool headed when the heat is on, yeah. Save my baby from the burning building. Take her home with the sprinklers on, alright.
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you, he rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Hey race fans, welcome to the Whoobazoo Racing Radio Network. Welcome to Drafting the Circus. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour or more as we dissect everything racing from this week. And wow, what a big week in racing. More news off the track than on, but there's a lot to talk about tonight. So before we get to that, let me introduce you to the panel we have tonight. With me, as always, from Richard Childress Racing, Mr. Gray Warren. Gray, how are you today?
I'm doing terrific. Hope everyone else is.
All right. Good to talk to you, Gray. Also, Christopher DeHarde, the IndyCar correspondent at Motorsports Tribune, is in the house. Christopher, how are you?
Fantastic. It's been a great day so far.
All right. Glad to hear it's a great day. Seth, Eggert, NASCAR correspondent over there with Chris at Motorsports Tribune. Seth, how are you?
I'm doing great.
All right. Good to hear from you, Seth. And last but certainly not least, wow, Richard Youden from Richard Childress Racing. Yeah, Richard had me cracked up earlier before the show. So anyway, Richard, good to talk to you. Always is. How are you tonight?
I'm very good. Thank you. Hope everybody else is well.
All right, and we've got a special guest in the studio with us tonight, Mr. Brock Beard, the proprietor of lastcar.info, who has a book that's ready to go to press about J.D. McDuffie, one of the last privateers in NASCAR. We will get to that later, but good evening, Brock, and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Hey, no problem. And you know what? Before we get to your segment, feel free to, if you want to jump in on any of the conversation we're having tonight, because I know you're a big racing guy like the rest of us. So just real quick.
Absolutely.
So just real quick, let me just go down the list of the headlines from this week, and it's a bit of a long list. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go down the list top to bottom, and I'm sure I've omitted some and left some out. And then I'm just going to throw it to the panel and let you guys grab any topic and talk about it one at a time, not all at once, okay? So Smithfield is out at Richard Petty Motorsports, okay? And this whole divorce is rather ugly, with a little he said, she said, he's a liar, she's a liar. But either way, Smithfield is headed to Stewart-Haas Racing. We're not sure who they're going to sponsor, but we know they're not going to sponsor Danica Patrick because Danica Patrick is out of a ride, and that's been dominating the racing headlines for the last day and a half. The smart money is on Eric Amarola going to Stewart-Haas Racing, although that's not yet confirmed. Bubba Wallace, in the meantime, is looked to be pursued by Richard Petty Motorsports. He filled in there for a while Eric was recovering from some injuries, so that's possible there. The 77 team is on the verge of shutting down if they don't find a sponsor. Why nobody would go after Furniture Row Racing with the record they have with their 78 car is beyond me, but that looks like they may be shutting their doors there. In other news, Zach Veach has signed a multi-year agreement with Andretti Autosports where he will be replacing Takuma Sato. Takuma Sato, who won the Indy 500 this year, is headed to Rahal Racing to make that Rahal Letterman Lanigan to make a two-car team over there. In the meantime, Tony Kanaan is leaving Chip Ganassi Racing, headed apparently to A.J. Foyt Racing, where we're not sure who's out there, either Daly or Munoz, but the smart money is that Munoz is the one sent packing. Zach DeMello, standout in Indy Lights, will be in a third Rahal car in Sonoma and with his eye on perhaps a full-time ride for next year. SPM, Smith-Peterson Motorsports, has announced an Indy 500 deal for Tristan Gramendy that's going to be funded by Didier Camels, who happens to be a convicted murderer. So if that's not crazy enough for you, J.R. Hildebrand is evidently out at Ed Carpenter Racing, as we all got the good news that Spencer Piggott is getting the full-time ride that he deserves, rather than just running the road courses. Speaking and going back to Chip Ganassi is evidently going to scale down to 2 cars. And Scott Dixon confirmed. We don't know who's driving the second one. There's a few names being floated out there, and we'll get to those later, as Elio Castroneves seems to be doomed to head into sports cars unless he wins a championship and can change Rogers' mind. Mercedes announced they're going to retain Valtteri Bottas in Formula One, and McLaren is going to pick up Renault Power. Speaking of Renault, Carlos Sainz will leave Toro Rosso to go to Renault, which kind of shuts the door on Robert Kubica's return to Renault, although suddenly Kubica's name is now being linked to Williams to replace Massa, who, as we remembered, forgot that he was retired and raced another year. So that's what I've got. So anything you want to jump in on, and Seth, I'll throw it to you first.
Well, the NASCAR stuff, aside from the 77 shutting down, I first said on this show back in late May, early June. I was in Charlotte. I heard Danica was going to be out of 10, Almirola was going to be into 10, and Bubba was going to be in the 43. I mean, I wasn't surprised when I heard the news. I'm just surprised that it took so long. But it seems like it kind of wasn't going to happen, and then when the Smithfield deal with Petty fell apart, everything fell back into place, so to speak. So
this Smithfield thing is pretty ugly if you start reading the comments going back and forth. It seems like, Richard Petty is trying to say they had a handshake deal, and then Smithfield was someone not happy that they were pursuing Bubba Wallace. Smithfield pretty much said that Richard Petty's making stuff up, and there was no handshake agreement, and Smithfield's concern was the lack of performance from the team, and beyond that, the lack of a clear plan to improve the performance. So, what else are you hearing on this, guys?
Well, as far as lack of a plan, I'm not entirely sure what Smithfield was talking about, considering there was the rumors that Petty was going to switch from being aligned with Roush to being aligned with Richard Childress Racing. I mean, a full-scale manufacturer swap was being rumored, a driver change. I mean, just about everything you could think of was going to change for Petty. So I'm not entirely sure where Smithfield is coming from in the sense that they didn't have a clear plan.
Richard, Gray, any opinions?
We've been hearing this rumor mill stuff going on and on for weeks on end, and I don't think anybody really knows what's going to transpire. I think the RPM is really in a state of flux right now. They've already decided not to renew the lease on their current shop, so they're looking for another place to go with all the other stuff that's going on. So right now, we're looking at RPM without a home, without a driver, and without a sponsor. And it's kind of late in the game. So I know that was part of the reason for Richard's disappointment and the tone of the statement that he made was because of the lateness of all this going on. So, gosh, I tell you, I don't know. I would hate to be one of those guys that works over there and, just with everything up in the air, having to worry about what was going to transpire over the next 10 weeks.
Do you think this is a little bit of a sort of setting a tone a little bit for the way NASCAR is evolving, in that you're maybe getting away from some of these old school handshake deals and, companies, brands being loyal to a certain team, we're getting into a more commercial world where deals are struck and contracts aren't even worth the paper they're written on, and maybe it's sort of, I don't want to say that this sort of business model is passing some of these guys by.
Yeah, I mean, and like it was alluded to, some of the old business deals were done that way. But, we're not only talking about a different time in racing, we're talking about a different time in society as well. Business was conducted differently back in the old days. Racing business and every kind of business. So yeah, I think basically what it boils down to is it was a misunderstanding between a group of people about what was going to transpire and what were the promises made and not made. And I think a lot of it's driven by the disappointment and it's hard to say. Seth maybe can correct me on this, but my understanding that Smithfield has undergone an ownership change within the last year as well. Is that correct?
Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. I don't remember seeing that. But at the same time, I know some of their partnerships have changed in the past year. I know they're still partnered with Waffle House. I know they went from being partnered, I want to say, with Lowe's Food, which is based here in Mooresville, North Carolina, to, I want to say, being partnered with, I think, Safeway, which is another grocery chain. So I know some of their partnerships have changed. So I honestly don't know if they have had an ownership change, but it wouldn't surprise me.
But what's interesting, though, is it has led to a pretty much a war of words between the two parties, both of them coming out with some rather terse statements directed at one another. And I think that's a shame. Smithfield was a good and loyal sponsor for the Petties for a number of years, and I'm sure there's a lot of disappointment on both sides. I honestly hope that, Richard Petty is such an icon in the sport. He's single-handedly one of the most influential people the sport has ever had for not only the growth of the sport over the long run. I hope that they can come together and land a driver. I heard it was announced today that they would like to take Bubba Wallace with them as a driver if they can secure sponsorship. I hope they can do it and get a plan together to be able to field a car in 2018.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and great to your point about the changing ownership or changing leadership in these companies. We've seen that a lot. Across the board in different companies. That's the new CEO at Target is what's caused the racing sponsorships to cease there. They dropped the IndyCar program last year, and they'll be dropping the NASCAR program at the conclusion of this year. Changing leadership at the top of Verizon has the IndyCar series wondering if they'll be looking for a new title sponsor. So it's again, there's a lot of changing business models. From the race teams, they really need to really show these guys where there is value in the sponsorship package there. And it's a tough sell for a lot of these guys right now, particularly somebody with questionable performance like Richard Petty Motorsport.
That's true. That's one of the things that Smithfield stated in their statement, that they were disappointed in the performance of RPM.
Now, just a thought on that. It's somewhat of an unpopular opinion, I will say that, but it seems to me that Richard Petty Motorsports, or Petty as a whole, has somewhat been on life support since the death of Adam Petty. If you think about it, they have only had about 5 wins in that entire time period. And they've gone from being on their own, and it looked like they were going to have a plan with Chad McCumbee, and then they had a investor come in, wipe that out. Then they merged with the Gillettes. We all know how that turned out. Then they went to Andy Mernstein. They hired Ryan Truex and Corey LaJoie as development drivers, and it never really panned out. And now it seems like they have another good shot with another young driver, Darrell Wallace Jr., except they don't have sponsorship anymore, and they may not even have manufacturer support, depending on what goes on.
Yes, they're between a rock and a hard place, no doubt. And you're right. We have, the petty enterprises of old has not existed in many years as we knew it and grew up with. So, yeah, I think, and they have basically survived with in many ways with Richard Petty being more or less the figurehead of certain business deals and lending his name to organizations. It has really not been a true Petty motorsports, if you will. So yeah, I think there's been this rumor going around that Richard Petty may merge or become an alliance team of RCR. And basically, if that were to happen, they would essentially be using RCR equipment, chassis, engines, and they would provide that team would essentially just be providing the manpower to take the car to the track and maintain the car, on the race weekend. So, I mean, again, all that's speculation and conjecture. We don't know that that's happened, but that's been, a hot and heavy rumor for the last 6 weeks or so.
All right, so let's move on. Like I said, we've got a lot to cover. Real quick, let's talk about Danica, because that's been dominating the headlines, as Danica is known to dominate headlines, of course. So Danica's out at Stewart-Haas. Looks like Amarola is in. I would expect Kurt Busch to go ahead and re-sign there with Stewart-Haas as well. We're not sure if that Smithfield money is going to go on the 10 or it might go on the 14 with Clint Boyer. But do you believe, and the articles about Danica run the gamut from people saying kind words about her to people wishing her good riddance, kicking her out the door, to people saying she's going to come back to IndyCar, which I honestly don't see that happening. I don't believe she has a desire to return to IndyCar. Perhaps she does, but you guys see a spot for her anywhere in the Cup Series, or do we think that her retirement is imminent? Chris?
Honestly, I don't see a spot for her in NASCAR. She hasn't had the kind of performances that she's needed to have in order to justify, in my opinion, her having a seat. And I guess to kind of keep this brief, Frank, knock knock.
Who's there?
Danica.
Danica who?
Exactly.
Oh. Yep. Yeah, I don't think she's been on the mind of any IndyCar owners. I mean, again, as I recall her in an interview saying years ago she had no desire to return to IndyCar. I can't speak to her mindset right now, but I believe her, also like Sam Hornish, after the Weldon thing, have no desire to step in an open-wheel car. She's got a brand now she's marketing. She's got a boyfriend that knows how to win races. So, I don't know what's next for Danica, but suffice to say, she can still make the headlines. Just based on if you read all the racing articles today, she's dominating the headlines, and she's not said anything about what she's doing, but.
To put it into context, if the news that Paul Menard was swapping from RCR to the Wood Brothers, there was no ripple on that. The news that Danica's out of the 10 car is the front page on CNN tonight.
Oh yeah,
Danica's power.
Exactly, yeah. So.
And as Gray and myself were talking about earlier in the week, she's probably run better than Paul this year, and she could probably do a job for RCR.
Yeah, she does have a better average finish. She's sitting currently about at a 20th place average finish, which is smack dab middle of the field. And I tell you, when you look at her, she's probably as serviceable a driver as the back half of any Cup field anyway. I think the problem with Danica is that her overall star marketing power has become somewhat tarnished over the last 6 or 7 years because she hasn't had the success, and that's tough too. And we're also in a climate where sponsors are exceedingly tough to get. Everything you hear about Danica, there's no concrete word on where she'll go here, she'll go there. I don't see many rides for her in the Cup Series right now, unless she could secure a sponsor and bring it with her. Again, drivers, it's an owner's market right now, and they're the ones that are going to be getting these drivers, and pretty much the drivers are going to have to accept the best deal they can get to get in one of these cars. I've also heard that Danica, had been looking at, winding her career down. I've heard where she she's still relatively young, and she and her boyfriend will probably like to start a family at some point in time. And the clock's ticking on that. So you never know what she'll decide.
No, you never know. Plus, there's sports cars, although a lot of those rides are imploding now. But anyway, so I don't see a spot for her in IndyCar either right now. But although the IndyCars, there are a lot of seats in flux here, and I want to throw this to you, Chris, with some of the news there. Like Schmidt-Peterson, they're looking for a driver to replace Michaela Loesch in the second car, and they said they have a short list of 28 drivers.
Oh, I was actually contacted by them to drive. No, kidding.
Well, yeah, they saw you in iRacing, right?
I know. Well, I mean, winning a 5-wide finish in Pro Miles at the Speedway obviously impressed somebody, and I digress. The short list of 28 drivers, I mean, they're going all over the place. WEC, sports, other sports cars, Formula 2, Indy Lights.
Touring,
opinion,
German touring cars.
In my opinion, probably the more likely candidate is going to be Santiago Urrutia from Indy Lights. He's done races with their Indy Lights team back in 2016, so he knows a lot of the people that are over there, and he's going to have money behind him. And he's actually he would be a really good personality for IndyCar. His response to winning at Gateway told me all I needed to know, but looking at some other rides that have changed, places today, Zach Veach being confirmed at Andretti Autosport. That's a 4-American lineup at Andretti Autosport with him, Rossi, Hunter-Reay, and some other guy. But another
owner's kid, right?
Whatever.
Yeah.
Then we look at Spencer Pigot being confirmed to being the full-time driver in the 21 car for Ed Carpenter Racing. He's the winningest driver on the road to Indy and actually has done a really good job for Ed Carpenter's team this year. The only downside is that, unfortunately, some bad luck has hit him in a couple of races where he was doing really well this year, like at Toronto and at St. Petersburg, where he wasn't able to show how good he really is. And having a full-time seat where he won't have to worry about, being in, being out, being in, being out, having a full-time seat will truly help him develop as a driver and will really help elevate Ed Carpenter's team, in my opinion.
Oh, no doubt. No, that's great news for both Zach Veach and for Spencer Pigot. So, and again, what are your thoughts on this young Canadian gentleman, Zachary Clement DeMello, who's going to...
Clement DeMello...
I think this kid's pretty good.
Clement DeMello has shown flashes of brilliance this year. He won the second Indy Lights race at Road America. So he's done a decent job this year. He did have some issues earlier in the season that prevented him from getting higher up in the standings. He did finish the last half of the year. What was it, like sixth place finishes and up in a row, which no other driver did that for the last half of the season. So, in my opinion, he's definitely quick. Would I say he's absolutely ready for IndyCar? Maybe not.
Well, we'll find out at Sonoma because he's gonna get his first start there in a Rahal car, which a Rahal car is that's not a bad ride to have in a road course, as a Graham. So, but anyway, Gray, you've got a question for Chris.
Yeah, it was announced this week that I think Kanaan is going with AJ Foyt. Is that correct?
That's the rumor. Of course, the team hasn't put anything out yet about it.
I saw that, and I didn't know whether that was didn't read the whole thing. Didn't know whether that was a confirmation or something concrete or or just something on the rumor mill line. So okay,
The move does make sense if you think about
It's
it.
a pretty strong rumor. I mean, it's coming from some solid sources. But I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
I mean, it's a solid rumor because it's going to be one of the last paying drives in IndyCar because, Ganassi's scaling down. Kanaan didn't really have that many other options, and I think Foyt respects the hell out of what Tony has been able to do for Ganassi. Well, in the early part of Ganassi, he only has one win there in the last few seasons with 2014 at Fontana. But with what he's done at Andretti and how he always runs well at Indy, I think we're going to see Kanaan. If he does go to Foyt, he's going to team up with Connor Daly because I don't see Munoz landing that drive for next year. And I think Connor, with his recent uptick in performance, has shown that when he has the crew and the car and everything in Indianapolis, that team chemistry is starting to really gel, and you can see how well that they've been doing recently with the 5th place at Gateway and an 11th place finish over at Watkins Glen. I expect to see more things out of Connor Daly next year to show everybody that he deserves the ride that he has.
Absolutely, and I think that adding Tony into that mix there, I mean, the one thing that the Foyt team lacks this year is a guy with years of experience who can really talk to the engineers about what the car is doing. Munoz is rather new to the game. Daly's even newer. Foyt's best result was when the last win was 2013 when Sato won at Long Beach.
Correct.
He really hasn't had just a really solid guy that can develop the car and develop the other drivers. So and Tony's done well in that role with Andretti when he was I don't know, I had read it. They said he was the babysitter for Danica and Marco, but he certainly helped those folks along a bit. So I think it'd be a good role for Tony. I don't know how competitive that team's going to be, but having Tony will only make them better because they can't get much worse.
And when you look at how the Foyt team has been going the last 2 or 3 seasons, they've had a lot of struggles. And then I've said for a while now, if you're going to have a successful IndyCar team, you need to be based in the Midwest or be Roger Penske. Well, it's true. And then having Foyt's team based in Houston, they haven't had the recruiting power to get a lot of people that are in the Midwest where the industry is. Kind of like how everybody's in Charlotte for NASCAR except for Furniture Row. And I'm not sure if Wood Brothers still has a small shop in Stuart, Virginia or not. But
just a museum. Their shop is in the Charlotte area.
All right. But Foyt's team is going to have issues with recruiting talent unless they get the shop fully in Indianapolis. And I think AJ would probably enjoy being in Indianapolis as well because, let's face it, getting up there in age, I mean, Indianapolis is a decent place to be. I mean, you're going to have to deal with snow, but at least you can go eat at Charlie Brown's every day and have the speedway within inside of your workshop window.
Absolutely. So anyway, so let's move on. Again, there's so much to talk about, but we had a race in Richmond this weekend. Nice Saturday night race. Nothing interesting happened, other than poor old Martin Truex 2 weeks in a row is got the checkers in sight and watches somebody else takes the win. The interesting thing here is, Martin.
This weekend was much more cruel.
Much more cruel, yeah, because the last one, Martin cut a tire, brushed the wall, no caution, right? This one, Derek Cope, who I didn't even know he was still racing, cuts a tire, hits the wall, throw the caution, forces a restart. Martin knew his car wasn't great on restarts, gets snookered by Mr. Target car, Kyle Larson. I don't know why his name popped out of my head for a second. Snookered by Kyle Larson on the restart and then ends up in the wall. So not only loses the race, tears up a good race car, and then people were giving him crap that he wasn't all happy and smiley when they gave him the regular season trophy. But he's only 10 minutes removed from this huge disappointment, and I tell you what, I like a guy that wears his emotions on his sleeves. When they said, "Well, hey, you've got 56 playoff points," he said, "I should have 5 more." I think Truex is great, but The bigger thing was this crazy ambulance story. So which one of you guys wants to go ahead and tell the ambulance story?
Well, there was more than just the crazy ambulance story. There was a whole series of gaffes.
Well, yeah.
during the race all night. One of the first was when Kenseth was leading the race. He goes down into turn 3, and there's a lapped car in front of him, and he has to get on the brakes really, really hard, and he slid the tires and created a lot of smoke. Well, NASCAR goes ahead and throws the caution as if he had a blown engine. So that was gaffe number 1.
And the official reason for that caution was smoke.
Yeah, it was smoke, and all it was
Shout out to Tony Stewart.
Yeah,
I was going to say, yeah.
All it was brake smoke, and he had to get on the brakes real hard to avoid a lap car. So that was the first thing. Somebody was a little bit quick with the trigger there to of course, Kenseth had what jumped out to about a 2-second lead or something, and the race had kind of settled into a little bit of a procession there. So anytime a race gets like that, NASCAR loves the opportunity to throw a caution to kind of bunch up the field again and have an exciting restart. Then we had the next thing that Matt Kenseth was also a part of too. I believe was this one brought about when Danica and Austin Dillon got together? Okay, Austin Dillon, Danica get together on the racetrack. Danica spins, brings out the caution, and for whatever reason, an ambulance decided. I don't think we'll ever know the complete version because NASCAR's not going to admit any wrongdoing on this thing. But most times, and and Richard, he's watched many of these races and he's been on the scanner, and we've all at the racetrack, we've been on the scanner. We know that these other vehicles do not move at all unless directed to do so by the tower. For whatever reason, this ambulance moves, and then it gets down low and starts up along the pit entrance. Well, they try to get it to stop, and they finally get it stopped. But the second gaffe of that was that someone opened pit road when all this was going on. So there's 2 gaffes right there. The cars see the green light to enter pit road, so obviously they're all going to dive for pit road. The ambulance is sitting there when they round the curve, and it creates an accordion chain reaction effect. And, of course, it ends Kenseth's night. He runs into the back of Clint Boyer and busts a radiator on his car, and he has to go behind the wall and retire from the race, which at that time could have been very, very pivotal had we had a new winner in the race. It would probably have knocked Kenseth out of the chase or the playoffs. As it happened, Kyle Larson gets the win at the end because of another questionable call by NASCAR. Late in the race with, 3 to go, I believe it was, Derek Cope brushes, and I do mean brushes the wall. Normally I had seen during the course of the race, other cars get high and skin the fence a little bit, come back down, no caution is thrown, and this particular incident looked much the same. I saw no debris on the track, which NASCAR claimed there was. Other people there at the racetrack claimed there was no debris on it, but that's neither here nor there. Caution comes out and erases Truex's about a 3-second lead. The cars come down pit road. Larson beats Truex off pit road and gets to choose his lane on the restart, and the rest is history. He gets a good restart, drives away, and then Denny Hamlin gets into Truex racing for the 3rd position, and big crash, and that ends Truex's night. So kind of like that.
Gray, do you think that debris on the track was the crusty old driver in a car 20 laps down?
Look,
come on, that's funny.
I'm not going to debate whether there's other people that have debated whether Cope should have been out there, whether he had every right to be out on the racetrack. He made the field and he was driving. It doesn't matter if he was 1 lap or 20 laps down. He was still out there competing, as was his right, on the racetrack. He wasn't in anybody's way. It just so happened that he had a problem with 3 laps to go, and he brushed the wall.
And he's not the one that threw the caution.
He didn't, right. And
exactly.
For me, I would not have thought that caution should have come out. But here again, NASCAR likes drama. They like close finishes. And if they see the opportunity to do that, they're going to throw that caution. That's just what they do. And that, you talk about precedent. That's always been the precedent for NASCAR. We can't debate that. They've always done that. So the caution comes out, and you knew what was going to happen. We were going to go to overtime, and we were going to have a slam bang finish. That much is a given. I don't see people. Derek Cope is just the innocent victim in all this, I think.
Exactly. And I'll just say this. You know what? If Truex doesn't win this Cup, it'll be a travesty because he has been so spot on at every kind of track this year. So I just hope that nothing crazy like this happens in any of these elimination races. That's for sure.
And I think they're going to have to take a different look at how they officiate these things. And I mean, we it's not only NASCAR. We see it in all forms of major league sports.
Oh, sure,
Officiating does, in a lot of cases, determine the outcome of these sporting events, whether good or bad. But it's just like I said, it's just what went down, and I don't think fans or people in the media that jumping on Derek Cope said, "Oh, he shouldn't have been out there. Shouldn't have been." Hey, everybody that starts that race should be on it. What are you going to do? Go out here and we have a late race, stop the race, and eliminate the back half of the field, make them go to the thing, just leave the cars and leave. You can't do it. That's part of the race. That's what happens. So people need to get over that part of it. If they really want to direct their anger to anyone or to the displeasure about it, NASCAR is the perfect target for that.
So speaking of which, I want to talk about they let people off on the pit entry blend line because of the ambulance, right? But yet they applied the 5-minute clock to Kenseth.
They waited about 5 minutes to even apply it too.
Yeah,
so they kind of gave them double the time.
Well, I guess the car was still, I guess wrecked enough, but.
Well, I think there was so much tongue lashing going on between crew chiefs to the official in their pit and directed at the tower. I don't think any directives could come down for about 5 minutes until they got a handle on things. That's probably why the delay of that. But yeah, that was a big deal. NASCAR can.
It just reminds me of some of the USAC officiated races from the early days of the IRL, right? And Christopher, you know what I'm talking about.
They actually officiated?
Sort of. I don't know. Ask Harry Lyondike and AJ. So.
Well, USAC stands for, right? You suck at counting.
Ah, there you go. So guys, let's
one further thing.
Right,
I'm going
go right
to direct this comment. Brock, who's joined us tonight, is also commenting on our chat that we have going on behind the scenes, and he was saying that NBC was also complicit in the caution because Steve Tart was saying, look at debris. Those debris that you saw was actually rubber that was coming up off that car where he'd got up into marbles and was spreading the rubber. There really wasn't any debris as far as chunk, pieces of the car or anything. I saw what you're alluding to. It was just, the marbles up in the upper that had been deposited up near the wall that came down. But I didn't see any tire carcass or any sheet metal or anything else deposited on the track.
So this is probably a good segue to go ahead and bring Brock into our conversation. We're talking about Derek Cope, and Seth just put in there, Cope was fired by Premium Motorsports, by the way.
Yeah, after the race, they agreed to part ways.
Okay.
Wasn't so premium.
That's unfortunate. But when we're talking about cars at the back of the field or cars several laps down. Now, Brock, you've made a project of this. You're the proprietor of who's making all that noise? So Brock, it's lastcar.info. That's your website, and you followed the last place finisher of NASCAR races for years and years and compiled an incredible database. So, Brock, just let's talk about that a little bit, and then I want to talk to you about your book project too.
Yeah, certainly. Derek Cope, it's actually an interesting transition on that too. He kind of featured big time in the statistics on our website as well, because he actually had a number of before he disappeared from the sport. He actually had a number of last place finishes back then. But we started the site back in 2009, and we've been just keeping doing weekly statistics on all the top 3 series. Kind of phase them in through the next couple of years. And just following the back of the field, and also kind of the last changes at the back of the field as well. And it's kind of taken on a life of its own.
Interesting work, and I know we're going to bring you in talk about your project with J.D. McDuffie. But I think at one time I saw what J.D. McDuffie up until about 2014 held the record for most last place finishes, and who was it? Joe Nemechek overtook him in 2014 or 2015, something like that.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, actually, Joe. J.D. McDuffie had 32 last place finishes in his career, and he finished last in his final start as well. And Joe Nemechek passed him in 2014 at Martinsville, and he pretty much left to help John Hunter out since then. So he still stands at that one finish lead since then.
So who's next on the list? Active driver to take that crown. Anybody close?
Well, it's kind of been a weird thing, because if you look at the top 3 divisions across the board, there's not really much of a battle now, because Jeff Green has racked up a ton of them in the Xfinity series in the start, and kind of helping out TriStar Motorsports, now RSS Racing, with kind of the start and park efforts. And, it's that he now has, I believe, 101 across all 3 divisions, and closing on 100 in just Xfinity alone. So wow. It kind of sheds new light on some of these other drivers.
I find it curious that when you chronicle JD's career in his last, I think JD started 650 some odd races over a 25, 26, 27, 28 year career. JD actually, he is well known. He was a underfunded privateer, but JD's races were long and well before the start and park era. And JD actually got out there and he completed quite a few laps in the races that he did compete in, and just ended up finishing, in last place. And basically he wasn't out there trying to do a start and park. And when you compare that to Joe Nemechek's statistics, where Joe when he went and started his own team back in about 2008, 2009, he along with several other teams, they were a dedicated start and park team, and I think that's where Joe probably really padded his last place statistics was between 2008 and 2014.
And you're right, and that's a real challenge with the website as well. And I don't mean to disparage JD at all. I mean, quite the opposite. I got you. Yeah, I mean, there were quotes there that said, people were questioning him even back then and saying, no, when I go in there, I'm there to win. But, and you're right. That's kind of the challenge when you have these other drivers today. The sport has changed so much, where start and parking is a big thing to, where startup teams really needed it to kind of get their legs under them and everything. And, but that's the thing, is the challenge with the website, of course, is that these finishes don't really get tracked that often. It used to be back in the day, even ESPN, they would show the first car to go behind the wall or something. And here you have to kind of piece things together. So I always try not to be, skeptical about if this is a start and park thing, or if this is a legitimate thing. If I have the information, I'll put it in there. But when I list the cause out and it says it came out with transmission problems after 2 laps, I'll put transmission problem after 2 laps.
You try to be black and white with it. I got you. You just where he finished is where he finished. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, but it is a legitimate concern, because in 2012, I was thinking earlier today, there was a time where Joe Nemechek was at Sears Point, and he was making several trips to the garage area, and I was just in the stands. I couldn't see what was going on. I thought he had a mechanical problem, and he was losing a lot of laps. Turned out after the fact, he was actually pitting his car behind the wall because he didn't have a pit crew, so he was having his garage crew do it. So that's where the nuances kind of come in.
Right. Yeah, and it is a unique situation.
Yeah, so let's talk about J.D. McDuffie a little bit, since you've written a book about him, and I really want to know when this book is coming out and where we can buy it. But J.D., you talk about his last place finishes. I mean, over his career spanned nearly 30 years from the early 60s to the early 90s, and in addition to all the last place finishes, well, he did rack up 106 top 10 finishes and one pole. So the guy wasn't terrible, that's for sure. But Brock, what drew you to J.D. McDuffie? And you've told me you're writing, after his time. You never actually watched him race. Gray and I are old enough to have watched him race. But what kind of brought you to compelled you about his story that you wanted to go ahead and chronicle and write a book about J.D.?
Well, J.D. McDuffie is kind of an interesting figure in the sense that he seems like he's popped up in every project that I've worked on relating to NASCAR since I was a fan. I did the last place statistics. Of course, he came up there. When I grew up going to the road courses, so people talked about JD in that context as well, and he just kept showing up in these things, and so it got me really curious about it. Especially, this was about like 2000, 2001. The internet wasn't really fully developed on there, and you didn't see a whole lot of information, so it just got me more curious about him. And what I've come to realize, especially now with LASCAR, is he's really the Dale Earnhardt of the back of the field. Like he's this driver that had a very similar background, limited education, and but very hands on, and had to claw his way into competition here. And, really, but for a couple of decisions, JD could have been in the exact same position that Earnhardt was, working with a different team and going from there. And, it just took a different direction. And, again, and we actually just got back from going to, Darlington a couple weeks ago and took a side trip to Sanford. And you go up there and he's not a forgotten or kind of hidden character there at all. There's so many people had so many stories about him, and we really wanted to bring that to light for sure.
Now, were you able to interview or speak with any of any of his crew members or folks that had worked with him, or drivers that competed against, or any family members in your research for the project?
Oh yes, and actually we did this a little bit backwards because the trip to Sanford kind of came at the end of our research. But in the first part of it, yes, we spoke with his wife Imogene, his daughter Linda. We also spoke with several of the crew members, Marty Burke, Jerry Glenn, several other people that were with him all the way up to the end of his career. A couple of his crew chiefs, fans that were at the track. We've had at least between 30 and 40 different people we've spoken with for this book alone. So again, it's a figure in the sport that maybe to some people, especially newer fans, isn't really that well known. But and again, I'm sure you and Gray can attest to this. A very popular figure for those who did get the chance to see him race.
Yeah, he was the ultimate privateer. Struggled his entire career, was always underfunded, and basically, he did it for the pure love of the sport and what he did, and that's to be commended. He followed his dream, and he did it. He did it every day, and the sport's filled with other people that would have similar stories to JD. Wendell Scott, Jimmy Smutt Means, others, Dave Marcus. Dave Marcus was his career was a lot like JD's, only that Dave got that break and got to drive some nice equipment during his career. But it's really good, and I want to commend you for taking on this project. And I for one look forward to reading this book.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And that's really what we're looking for. We're looking to do a book here that's also, definitely for people who knew him, but also people who may not have known him or not have known about racing at all, and make it for all readers. But that's why we worked with Waldorf Publishing is the publisher. The book comes out on July 15th, 2018, so just a few months away here. It's going to be a print release. It's going to be available on Amazon as well as through Waldorf themselves. We're going to have more details as we get closer to that date. But yeah, July 15th, 2018 is the release date for the book.
I'll have to go go in my archives tonight. I have a autographed J.D. McDuffie hero card in some of my stuff somewhere. I'll have to dig it out and scan it and post it.
Yeah, no, I'd love to see that. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool, man. I'm just really, there's a lot of, there's so much written about the Earnhardts and the Petties and whatnot. But I'm really glad that you latched on to JD and are going to be able to put this out there. And we'll do everything we can to help promote you with that. So, anybody else have a question for Brock?
Well, I guess I have one. As far as this year is concerned, 2017, who are the last car leaders heading into the playoffs for all three series?
Well, that's always kind of an interesting thing. We're very much an old school website. We go for a full season championship. We thought about doing a chase format, but we kind of changed that. We kind of changed it up after a while. I understand there's some people on Reddit, I believe, that set that up and had Michael Annette be the champion last year. But this year we're looking at Jeffrey Earnhardt as a leader in the Cup Series right now. In Xfinity, Jeff Green is extending a lead over Jordan Anderson. And the Truck Series, there's currently a three-way tie that Todd Peck is edging out in front. So those are the drivers to look at going forward.
Interesting in a dubious way.
Exactly. But again, putting the names out there. I mean, we spoke with Jeff Green at Darlington a couple weeks ago. I actually made him a T-shirt to commemorate his 100th overall last place finish, and he was so cool about it. Just happy to have somebody talking about him and everything, and very friendly guy. And that's what we like to do, is really bring focus to drivers like that. That just don't get talked about that much anymore.
Now, one more question. Now that I thought about it, if I remember correctly, I think Kevin Harvick is the only Cup driver without a last place finish. Is that correct?
So he is one of them. I can't speak for necessarily the entire field. Most of the field has, but you are correct that Kevin Harvick actually, he does not have one in a points race in the Cup Series. He does have two in exhibition races. But he is the longest active streak without a single last place finish. The second place guy is Brad Keselowski. He still doesn't have one as well. But he also has one in, I believe, the Busch Clash before.
Very interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it sure is.
So I'll tell you what. So we're to the point in the show where we're going to transition out of NASCAR and start talking about IndyCar. But before we do that, we've got a race coming up in Chicago. And we're going to make our picks. And, Brock, I'm going to let you have a pick, but I'm going to let you have two picks, Brock, because we always try to pick the winner. But, Brock, I'm going to let you pick the winner. And
the last place.
And I'm going to let you pick the last place. Yeah, so.
I was hoping you would.
So, Brock, I'm going to throw the first pick to you. Who do you think is going to win when we get to Chicago? And who do you think is going to finish last?
Oh, my goodness. This probably won't come as any surprise, but I'm terrible at picking winners. But going to victory lane, I'm thinking Furniture Row still is going to keep it going. I'm going to go on a limb. I'm going to say Erik Jones. I think Erik Jones, it's too bad he's missed the cut for the chase, but I think I watched him at Darlington. I was very impressed with how he run, and maybe he'll bring a similar 1.5 mile setup and get that first win. But at the back of the field, you know what? Maybe one of those first-timers will get it in. I'm going to think Brad Keselowski for his first last-place finish.
Ouch.
How big our playoff story right there.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Okay, who
That'd
wants the next pick? Joey Barnes have just joined us from the road. Joey, you are traveling to Sonoma, so I know you've just joined us. But go ahead, give us a pick for Richmond. Or I mean Chicago,
last, right?
Yeah, well, if you want to pick Kyle Larson for Richmond, that'd be good. But go ahead and give us a pick for Chicago.
I actually like Kyle Larson to win Chicago. I mean, it's a kind of track that's a very unique skill set that takes to get around there, and I think high, wide, and handsome's how he likes it, and that's the kind of track that race presents.
Good pick.
Good pick. Good pick. Seth, you want to be next?
Sure. Well, Brock picked him to finish last, so I'm going to pick him to finish first. I'm going to go with Brad Keselowski.
All right. Seth, I like you. Richard, Youden, you've been a little quiet. Who do you like for?
I'm still here. Don't worry. It'd be fantastic if Joey Logano won, wouldn't it? That would really stick it to them. But I'm going to go. I'm going a little bit.
A Pyrrhic victory, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit closer to home. Actually, we've had a bit of a turnaround over the last few weeks. We've had some really, really strong runs, which has been great for the team, great for morale. I think Austin could get the job done. He likes the track. We've been working really, really hard to give him a better car, and that'll be a huge boost for the whole organisation. If if it's not a win, at least a strong finish. And I think we've put a lot of work in, and he does like the place.
And then that wins automatic pass to the next round. Yeah, good pick. Gray, who you like?
Gosh, you see a lot of stories out there, and a lot of people have been sort of picked up their game in the last few weeks and have started to run better. I'm gonna stick with the 18. I think he's gonna get a good run coming out of the box and get his playoff started off well with a win.
All right, that's an excellent pick too, and I'm gonna go with. Did I get everybody a pick, Chris?
I'll go with Truex, and can I go ahead and make a prediction for the entire chase?
Sure, if you like.
We'll have at least one encumbered win.
You know what?
Ooh.
That's a good possibility. That's a good possibility, and I wonder how they're going to deal with that. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So, but I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead with a guy who always comes alive in the chase, Jimmy Johnson. He's been kind of down and out the last several weeks, but this time of year he usually comes alive. And why not just start the playoffs with snatching the win in the first race of the playoffs? So, with that being said, all our picks are in. Joey, thank you for joining us from the road. I know you're in the car or in a hotel. You're on your way out to Sonoma to go out there and get some wine and cheese and watch some IndyCar racing. So let me just throw it to you. Preview the IndyCar race and the IndyCar championship that we're going to see go down here on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, so actually got in at 8 o'clock this morning and did a couple of media events today, one in Oakland for the Honda Steam Tour with Max Chilton, and then actually just finished doing it was at the winery next to the track, but it was a top 5 in the championship media availability. Had a chance to talk to all 5 guys. Interestingly, we'll start at the back of the field right now, back of the championship 5, I should say, not last car, but looking at Will Power coming into this thing. Learned that he hyperextended his knee out playing around in the ocean yesterday, and hobbling around a little bit, says it's not going to be a problem for this weekend. I heard he had a really, really good test. He was lights out last week. He's going to need some help to win this thing, but his track record at this place speaks for itself. He didn't really have a chance to fight for it last year with the gear issue, going head to head with Simon. I tell you what, he very well could have everybody else racing for second place, because I think we all know that when Will Power's on, he's the hardest guy to beat next to Scott Dixon. So, transitioning from him, I'm looking at Simon Pagenaud, potentially the chance to go back-to-back, be the first back-to-back champion we've had since, I think, Sam Hornish back in like 03, 03, 04, 02, 03, I forget. I think it's 03, 04.
Dario Franchitti.
Been a while.
Dario Franchitti, 9, 10, and 11.
Well, there you go.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
But it's been a minute since we've had that. He'd certainly like to be somebody to capitalize on it. that car that he dominated with last year is in the museum this year, so there ain't no bringing it back. Out of everybody, he's probably got, like, it's very interesting to see the body language of everybody that came in the room. Obviously, Will's about as relaxed as can be because he's got nothing to lose. You look at Simon, and he's got this, I don't want to say a chip on his shoulder by any means, but there's just that look he had last year. There's a little bit of that coming back where he's not focused on anything else. He's focused on himself, his race. It's the attitude that got him the championship. It's the body language that also got him that championship and a lot of race wins last year. He looked pretty stout at the test from what I heard. But although Penske, who doesn't look stout, shifting up to Elio, very quiet demeanor. Kind of got the feeling that all those rumors might be true. There's a lot of talk over the off season about, or during the season about what's going to happen to him after the year's over. Is he going to go join the Acura program with Penske? Is he going to remain in IndyCar? There's apparently a handshake agreement that none of us know about as far as what the details of it were, but we know there was a handshake agreement. Cindric, Roger, and him were all kind of a part of that. Nobody really wants to go in detail about it until after the season, but judging by the body language, I'm guessing there's some stipulations as far as him returning to IndyCar next year, and I don't think it's going to be anything less than taking that title. That said, he alluded to the fact that he feels his IndyCar career, 20 years running now, is complete, even if it doesn't have a championship. Find that a little hard to believe, but it's media day. He's going to touch on the things that he necessarily has to say, kind of a PR friendly way. Going to Scott Dixon, easy breezy with him. Tim Cindric on a conference call earlier in the week said that, man, I love the fact that we've got 4 guys in there, but I'd love it a lot more if we didn't have Scott Dixon in that mix. He's been a guy that's upset the balance of play. You look at 2015, you look at a couple of the championship runs against Elio. He's been the guy that's gotten the better of Elio. It'd be kind of karma if Elio could pull it out this weekend, I guess, from that perspective. But Scott's really kind of the wrench in the plans. Penske's going to do everything they can to ensure that it doesn't get out of the Penske camp, that they can win their 3rd title in 4 years. But I tell you what, Scott Dixon knows how to get around this place as well as any track, obviously. But the chance to get number 5, he'd be joining the likes of Foyt. Very rare errors. He continues to parlay his career into new heights. And then obviously Joseph Newgarden, coming to the points leader. There's not necessarily a swagger to him by any stretch. He's very focused, but it's in a business as usual kind of approach. He's not making this out to be a bigger deal. I think after Watkins Glen, you saw Cindric, who's his race strategist this year, probably calm him down, have him look at the race championship picture as a whole. I think there's going to be some gloves off in this scenario. Pagenaud alluded to the fact that even though they're cleared the air with him and Joseph, he understands how Joseph's going to race him now. And as well as anybody else, because this is the last race of the season. So coming into this fun media day situation, and there's tons of audio, I can't even make out all of it at this point, but I like where Elio's sitting. I like the fact that if this is a all or nothing scenario, I think he's the guy you don't want to go up against. Even though he hasn't necessarily been clutch in the past, he's also never been in a situation where he's had to race for his ride before. And we all know that could be motivation for a lot of people to do a lot of good things in their career. I personally think, and maybe this is me thinking that it's fitting because he's been in it 20 years, I like Elio to get his first championship and maybe do something Jeff Gordon couldn't, win a title in his last season. That said, it's going to be really tough to beat Scott Dixon, and it's going to be, Will Power's probably going to win this race on Sunday, honestly. Barring some sort of mechanical mishap, I don't think that it's going to be anybody else but Power in victory lane. He likes the way the new brakes the combination are at a place like Sonoma. It's notorious for low surface grip for these Indy cars. Essentially, the red sidewall tires from last year are now the blacks this year, so there's all sorts of different compounds going into play, and we're going to have about 6 hours of testing tomorrow to really fine-tune these things. If I'm looking at a guy to rival Will, I would probably go ahead, and I know I'm kind of on this bandwagon as of late, but I'd go with Rossi. Seeing what he did at Watkins Glen, he hasn't finished less than sixth in the last 5 or 6 races. He's got 3 podiums and a win. He's a tough guy to beat, and in Sonoma, he should have finished 4th here last year in his only start at the time, and that was when Honda had a defunct package compared to this year. When they didn't run nearly as good as this year, when Andretti wasn't nearly as good as this year. So just like he scrapped it out with Dixon last week, I could see a scenario where he's scrapping it out with Will Power this week.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Joe, I in my little racing pool, I picked Rossi for the win. I think he's going to be really tough to beat at Sonoma, but to your point, Will Power is tough to beat anywhere, any track, anywhere. So it's going to be interesting title battle. And Chris, I want to bring you in and get your thoughts on the championship and who you like, who you don't like.
Honestly, it's between Newgarden. I think it's going to be between Newgarden and Dixon, unless Elio pulls a massive rabbit out of the hat. As for which one wins it between Newgarden and Dixon, I think it's going to be Dixon because, quite frankly, Joseph hasn't been in this position before. But sometimes if you're up against, a wall like you are when Scott Dixon's going up against you, you don't have a choice but to, perform. I don't think
Joseph's drawing, getting the best drawn out of him because of Dixon, though. I mean,
true.
His game is raised to an entirely new level, and just because, and I know I'm interrupting you, and I'm sorry. The thing that I think, and you alluded to, is like, this is a crapshoot. These are 5 guys. Let's not forget, even though 7 are mathematically eligible, at race start, Graham Rahal is eliminated. But oddly enough, the longest of shots, if something ridiculous happens where the top 5 guys end up out of this race, Rossi's still sitting in a chance to win this title, which is crazy. We know he shows up in double points races, obviously, and fuel issues and places that have wreaths. But I mean, I look at the scenario with Newgarden. I don't remember the last time we saw an American with this much poise. I don't remember. Graham is great. Graham is the kind of driver who I would love to have on a race team because I love that kind of fiery attitude out of a guy. I like to see some swagger. I like to see some fight, and not to say that Joseph doesn't have the fight. And we've seen flashes of it out of other young American drivers. But I think when you look at Newgarden, you're seeing a guy that has championship medal that's shining through, and he's not going to be a guy that's going to finish 3rd or 4th in the championship consistently and be the American hopeful that doesn't get a title. I think it's a matter of when and not if, and it very well could be this year because he's knocking down every barrier that has stopped guys before him over the last decade that were Americans. I mean, you could argue, not that I think much of Sam Hornish Jr. as an overall IndyCar driver on talent because you've got to turn right and left and not just left, but I think that he's probably the best guy since then that we've had to come in and try to win a title.
Yeah, and Hornish was also the last guy to win a championship in his first year as a Penske driver. Of course, mind you, Hornish had 2 titles behind him with Panther to begin with, so he already knew how to win a championship. Now, the interesting thing about Joseph that I heard, and these were comments from Roger and Tim, both that Joseph has adapted to the organization faster and more efficiently than any driver they've ever seen, and I think that speaks volumes coming from those guys there. You agree? I
mean, I think a lot of that's because of Tim Cindric. You saw over the off season where and Chris might agree with me here, is just he moved over from Will Power's pit box, and calling race strategy for Will, guiding him to a title in 2014. Comes over, kind of new territory, new driver, learning a new person's cadences on the radio, on the track, etc. And has helped kind of bridge that learning curve because, I mean, let's be honest, Will's in his mid-30s. Simon, even though he's still relatively new to the IndyCar scene by comparison to other people like Graham and Marco and other guys that have been here a while, he's still in his 30s. Elio, 20th season in his 40s. Joseph Newgarden's a guy they can invest in the same way that they invested in a Rick Mears. You know, I honestly think that that's part of the reason they try to get him up to speed as quickly as possible. And by Tim Cindric being involved, Will Power mentioned it today. Tim Cindric, in his opinion, is the best race strategist in the entire garage. So, that's a hell of a compliment.
Yeah, Tim Cindric is a brilliant man. He absolutely is. When I first started reporting, and doing media stuff, the first interview I was granted was I drove over to Reading, Pennsylvania, where the Penske shops used to be held, and sat down in the office and interviewed Tim Cindric. And this is when he, was first brought into Penske. And right then and there, I realized how brilliant this guy was. And that was 17 years ago. And I just see where he's brought this organization to, not just the IndyCar operation, but the NASCAR teams as well. Tim is the president of racing operations for Penske, and he's just absolutely brilliant. And hats off to him for all he's done.
And I think also to add to this point is, I think it was really important that Joseph came from a Chevy organization and Ed Carpenter Racing. I mean, you're looking at a guy that we all know that Chevrolet and Honda, they all have their little nuances. They all keep things really tight-knit in-house. Different engine mappings, different gear ratios, different ways that they do things. And Simon, not only did he go to a brand new Penske team in his first year whenever he moved from Schmidt over to Penske, it was also a transition of manufacturers. So it was learning all those new nuances because, data points, and he had to take everything into account because, everything is different whenever you're changing engine manufacturers, because that, with the aero kit combined with the engine, it changes everything. It changes the technique of which you drive the car. So Pagano had to essentially relearn everything. Whereas you look at Joseph, and he was really set up with success for that. And I think a lot of that's because of Tim, and I think it's because they went after a guy that was already in their same manufacturer power plant. I would be very interested, regardless of how Sunday comes out, I'm very interested to see how Joseph adapts to the 2018 car, because I think that's really going to be the telltale of how quickly he adapts to that. That's where we're going to see a lot of that talent shine from a lot of the drivers on the grid.
Absolutely, yeah. So, but with no further ado, let's go around the table and everybody can make a pick for who wins Sonoma and who wins the title. Who wants to go first? Richard?
I think it's going to be Dixon for both.
All right. And I'll just throw this out there. Guys, we can repeat. Okay, usually in NASCAR, if a pick is taken, you can't take it, but this being the title battle, you can say something somebody else did. So, Seth, you're next.
I was going to say Newgarden for both.
Okay, win, and the championship. Brock.
You watch IndyCar at all? Yeah, I'm actually going to be there at that race as a fan, so that'll be cool.
Sweet.
Yeah.
You ought to hit up Joey.
Absolutely.
You guys hang out and have a beer. Yeah.
I'll be around.
There you go.
I'm actually about to have a beer.
Yeah, no, I'm going to sign up for Team Newgarden. Had a chance to interview him after about that crazy milk promo he did for the Indy 500, and that's endeared me to him since then.
All right, Gray, you're next.
I'm going to split it up. I like Will Power for the race, and I like Newgarden for the championship.
Chris?
I'm going to say Newgarden for the championship, and for the race, I'm going to say Castro Neves. Although I think if Castro Neves wins the race, he also wins the championship, doesn't he?
Not if Newgarden's second.
Yeah.
I think.
True.
Yeah, no. It's 22 point difference. You have to be, I think, 25. I think. I haven't looked at the point standings.
Yeah, there's a great little
I know.
spreadsheet.
Like, I haven't
you can
looked
all
at the
look
double point spread.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be cool to sit down and look at all the different clinch scenarios with who wins a race and who finishes where, who gets the championship. I think that's one of the neat things with so many drivers that going into this thing this weekend and it being double points. It could be some really crazy scenarios that come out of it.
I'm just going to throw this out there to just totally change the topic. I just love the clinch scenarios, right? Where we're watching the race report, point says they run now and this and that, and I think when we go back to our friends over at NASCAR, the whole chase for the championship race, we got 4 guys, and just whoever finishes first wins. You just don't have that anymore. The point says they run, and I mean that is just totally gone from NASCAR with this thing. Whoever finishes ahead of the other 4 guys wins. I mean, we've got 7 guys eligible for the championship. NASCAR has 4 because they want to make sure they have 4. But, gosh, they could have more. I don't know. Just throwing that out there. But who still needs to pick? Joey?
Yeah, I mean, Seth hadn't picked yet, I don't think.
I picked.
Did he?
Yeah, Seth picked.
Oh, okay.
Seth picked
Oh,
Newgarden.
I'm the last man up then.
That's right.
Man, Power for the Race just seems like an easy pick. Screw it. I like Bourdais for a bookend to what's been a hellacious season for Dale Coyne. It'd be a great story. It'd be a great way for him to cap off what's been one of the crazier years in his career. It's easy to overlook them all the time. And I think Newgarden and Dix are going to probably push each other to the point where they're off track. And I think Elio's going to end up squeaking this thing out to get the title.
And hopefully save his ride, because I'd love to see Elio one more season. So, but with that said, I guess the pick is to me. I like Rossi for the race, and I like Dixon for the championship. So, with that being said, let's talk about Formula One for just a few minutes before we go off the air. A couple of news stories coming out of Formula One. Richard, McLaren has confirmed they're going to go with Renault power. Carlos Sainz is moving over to Renault from Red Bull. And we're racing next week. Where?
Singapore.
Yes, the
night race.
Night race with the fireworks and whatnot. So,
best race of the year.
Oh yeah.
Just saying. Yeah, that's something special.
It is. Yeah, it's a pretty cool place to be, I think.
Yeah, I always liked that one. Yeah. So what are we looking at in Singapore? And then let's talk about Alonso, because there's some. I read a little tidbit that Alonso has gone ahead and signed for McLaren, but that I'm not sure how confirmed that source was. So
it wouldn't surprise me if Alonso hasn't signed up for at least another year, if not 2 or 3. So some of the performances put in this year have been, in his own words, the greatest of his career. I don't know whether that's him, blowing his own trumpet, as it were. But hey, he just seems to have been pretty impressive out there. In a way, the race this weekend has almost taken a side stage to a lot of the posturing and the movements that we've seen this week. It really all started off with the Carlos Sainz moving to Renault for next season. There's even talk of him actually being there for the last few races of the season, with I believe Pierre Gasly coming in to fill his seat at Toro Rosso. But from sort of the domino effect, that would put Jolyon Palmer out of her seat, which he's had a couple of good races recently, but he's had a fair crack of the whip at Formula One, and he's just not quite there. Maybe go to IndyCar, maybe do Le Mans racing, maybe a little bit more out of the public eye for him could suit him a little bit better. But with that Renault deal at McLaren, obviously that'll keep Alonso there, probably with Van Dorn for the next few years at least. That also means that Honda will move to Toro Rosso, which is an interesting move for Red Bull, the sort of parent team to Toro Rosso. They've been not quite so much the last year or two, but certainly in this turbo era, almost as vocal about how poor Renault have been, as in the same way that McLaren have been vocal about how poor Honda have been. This gives Red Bull a prime opportunity to monitor Honda's progress over the next few seasons, and potentially look at getting on board with Honda and ditching the Renault deal, which they've never been happy with, especially now Renault have come back in as a manufacturer team, and also now with the McLaren deal. And also, it puts a lot of pressure on McLaren. They've said for the last 2 or 3 years that they've had the best chassis in Formula One with the best aerodynamics and all of these sort of claims. Well, now it's an opportunity against what has undoubtedly in the last 10 years possibly been the ultimate chassis over that period in the Red Bull. So it's an opportunity now for McLaren to step up and show that they're worth it against that Red Bull chassis. So some huge changes going on. The one guy it does leave out in the cold a little bit is Robert Kubica, as we mentioned earlier. In a little bit of shame. I think the nostalgic guys really wanted to see him back in there. Was he too much of a risk for the Renault hierarchy? After his test at Hungary, where everybody said he did well, Renault came out and said, well, there's still some unanswered questions there, which put a little bit of sowed a seed of doubt in people's minds, I think. It'd be interesting, the potential of him going to Williams there to replace Massa, who, again, as you mentioned earlier, sort of seems to have forgotten that he retired last year. And, of course, also Valtteri Bottas signing for another year going into 2018. On top of all of that, I think one of the most interesting things to come out of this week is McLaren's statement that they would be interested or have not ruled out manufacturing their own engines in 2020 when the engine regulations change. I think that could be I think that's their ultimate aim, really. Now they've realised that this Honda deal hasn't worked, and they've sort of backed themselves down in a bit of a corner here. The Renault deal, I think, is only a temporary deal to make them at least competitive and potentially put themselves in the positions for podiums and wins. I think their aim eventually, as I say, come 2020, will be to manufacture their own engine. Oh, sorry, 2021, won't it? 2021, when the next cycle of engine rules comes into play. So, yeah, and then on top of all of that, you, as we mentioned, had probably one of the most visually stunning races of the year coming up at Singapore this weekend. You'd expect to see Ferrari bounce back from their disappointments on their home turf in Monza. You potentially expect to see Red Bull up there. You'd expect to see McLaren up there. Mercedes will potentially, again, struggle as much as Mercedes will ever struggle. You expect to probably see the likes of Williams and Force India struggle on a track that requires high downforce and isn't quite so power limited. So it's going to be a great race. Really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I can't wait. Yeah, so that'll be on at like about midnight Saturday night.
I think with it being a night race, I think it's about 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning on Sunday.
So it's like regular Formula One time for us. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, now a lot of what what the teams will do, it's got these little things that they do to sort of the fine margins that they work with. McLaren did a PR thing a few years ago with their hotel provider. They actually put up blackout curtains on their hotels, so the mechanics and the drivers and the engineers will not change their time zone from the UK. They will go to wake up at whatever time they normally wake up, which will be, say, early afternoon in Singapore, work as if it was a normal day, and then go to bed at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning Singapore time, and make sure they stick on that normal cycle.
But yeah, that's always the caveat with traveling through many time zones, that you can just really mess up sleep schedule. That's kind of smart. Yeah, just act like we're on GMT time. So Richard, who do you like for Singapore?
Ricciardo.
Okay. Joey, who do you like for Singapore?
That was going to be my pick. Damn it. Honestly, probably Bottas. I hate to pick a Mercedes car right now, just given everything, but he's been lights out on the street circuits. I look at Russia. It's really suited him. This kind of feels a little bit like that, although the longer wheelbase slightly hurts them. So, yeah. Ferrari's going to bounce back. I don't think Hamilton's going to have a good race. I think it's going to be Bottas, followed by Ricciardo, and then a Ferrari on the bottom step of that podium.
All right, cool. Brock, you got any opinion on who's going to win at Singapore?
I'll go with Verstappen.
Okay. All right. Gray?
I'm just going to say Hamilton because he seems like he's on a roll.
Why not? Yep, exactly. Chris?
I'll make Joey's night. Kimi Räikkönen.
I was going to pick Kimi. All right, Seth, who you got?
Vettel hasn't been picked yet, has he?
Not yet.
I'll take Vettel then.
Okay, so I guess that leaves me Lance Stroll. So, so I'll go with Lance Stroll. Why? I don't know.
You should probably pick Nico Hulkenberg. Just saying. He actually couldn't get his first podium.
What about Fernando?
Yeah, you know what? I like Nico Hulkenberg because
top 5 for Fernando is possible.
It was Singapore where Alonso got the win when Nelson Piquet Jr. Stuck it in the wall deliberately. So lightning could strike twice there.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this race suits Ricciardo more than any other on the whole calendar, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right there.
But I like Hulkenberg because he runs the number 27, and the number 27 is my favorite car number of all time. Golly, years ago I wrote an article about the number 27 and my favorite drivers running it. So, with that being said,
is that Paul Menard in that category?
Sure, why not? Yeah. Paul Menard won Sure. Yeah, you know.
He's not driving the 27 next year, but sure.
Sure, yeah. So, golly, I thought when Marco moved from the 26 to the 27, that was going to be his good luck charm, and well, that didn't work. So, oh man, good stuff, guys. Man, we're just about out of time, so I'm just going to go around the table for final thoughts. All 6 of you, because we've got a big panel tonight. Everybody get one final thought, and then we're going to sign off. And I'll start with you, my friend Gray.
Well, big weekend, the season finale for IndyCar and the first race in the playoffs. So yeah, we'll have a lot to look for this weekend. Always a good weekend to see it. I think with the different clinch scenarios, it's going to really make the IndyCar race very, very compelling and an enjoyable race to watch. So I'm looking forward to that and looking forward to see how the Cup guys shake out after the first playoff race.
All right, Seth, your final thought for the evening?
The ambulance incident at Richmond was not the first this season. There's been a couple behind the scenes. At Fontana, the ambulance drove so fast over the rough pavement, it literally launched Matt Kenseth out of the seat in the ambulance. And with Brad Keselowski at 2 different tracks, the ambulance got lost on the way to the medical center.
Just to throw this in, many years ago at a racetrack, I can't remember where it was, but the ambulance went over a bump and ejected Buddy Baker out of the back of it.
So I'm gonna tell you what, man. We need a skilled driver in that ambulance. Maybe that's a landing spot for Danica, ambulance driver. So, Christopher, you are next.
I'm looking forward to this weekend. It's going to be an interesting championship chase for IndyCar. And I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to happen in the offseason for who's going to get rides where. Still have the Chris Griffiths test coming up in October, and got a chance to talk to Anthony Martin recently, and he's looking to do some good things at that test. This is going to be an interesting offseason. I'm also looking forward to seeing how the rest of the chase comes out with all these different playoff points.
All right, Joey. Your final thought for the evening?
Yeah, a little bit of a small rant. So Danica announces her, leaving Stuart Haas, and that led some people in the media industry to immediately assume she's going to go to IndyCar. Stating fact with opinion and why she should.
Joey, some of those people aren't in the media industry, but you know who I'm talking about. But go ahead.
Yeah, but some of them happen to make their way into the media center. And anyway, there's a few people. This particular one that I read said that this is why she should do IndyCar, because she would have seats available. Fact is, seats are available not just if you have talent, but if you have money. And there's several drivers right now that have talent and no money. Secondly, I think it's crap that just because, and she's still pursuing a NASCAR career to my knowledge and to everybody else's, unless she's looking to start a family at the moment, I am really kind of pissed off at the fact that this is the subject that comes up during the week that we're about to celebrate a championship. I think it's cheap, and I think that people are putting their attention in all the wrong places. But then again, maybe that's why they don't come to the media center so much, because they don't have the attention to put into the sport to begin with, in which case they shouldn't cover it. Small rant, but yeah, that pretty much pissed me off, because they're not giving these drivers that are in this championship, Newgarden trying to get his first, Dixon trying to get his fifth, Pagenaud trying to go back-to-back, Elio trying to get his first after 20 years, and then Will Power trying to get another one, a first time with his son Bo at the helm with him. And then obviously new superstars like Rossi coming on strong. It's a disservice to them that we overlook what they've accomplished this year to chase something that is really not a non-story.
Joey, 2 words. Amen, brother. Amen. So, Brock, if you're still with us, you get a final thought for the night.
Ah, cool. Yeah, very excited about this weekend. Beginnings and endings with the IndyCar at Sonoma and the Chicagoland starting the chase, or the playoffs. I think that the playoffs, I'd be very surprised if Kyle Larson and Martin Truex aren't part of the Final Four. So I'm going to be kind of watching that starting this weekend, seeing how they get through all this. But and then on the IndyCar side, I mean, my goodness, I mean, it's been said by the rest of you here that it's a great show. It should be getting more attention, and be looking forward to seeing it.
Well, my thunder's been stolen there, but on the Danica situation. But I just wanted, I just want to reiterate those points. Really, you have somebody that in the last 4 completed seasons in NASCAR has finished 27th, 28th, 24th, and 24th, with the best finish of 6th. At Atlanta in 2014. They've lost their drive at one of the top teams with a very prized seat, which is a championship-winning team. Shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Maybe gets a little snippet of a column in the afterthoughts. No, this is front page news on CNN. It's a crazy world.
It's a crazy world. My final thought of the night is I always love the fact that we go into the season ender at Sonoma with IndyCar. And, okay, somebody's dog playing drums.
Seth?
I don't know what that was. Anyway, my final thought, I just love when we go into the season ender Sonoma with so many guys mathematically able to win this thing. Some have a closer shot than others. Some have an easier path. This is one of the tightest battles we've seen in years, with only 3 points separating the top 2 and only a few more points separating the top 4. So I'm really looking forward to see what goes down at Sonoma, and if it's going to be clean on the track or if it's going to be a matter of I'm going to take points from you. So with that being said, I want to thank each and every one of you on the panel. Gray, Seth, Chris, Richard, Brock, good to have you on the show. And Joey, have a great time this weekend at Sonoma. Don't drink too much of that wine. Bring me some home.
I don't drink wine.
You're in Sonoma. You're in Sonoma.
That's
I don't
the
care.
spirit.
I mean, give me some Jamesons and I'm happy. That's all I can tell you.
All right, well, go to the Grand Prix in Ireland.
Yeah. We have other beverages. You'll be fine, man.
All right.
I mean, if I could be, it's funny you say that because there's actually a Grand Prix of Ireland Cup in the Indianapolis Museum.
Yes, there is.
Just
Yes,
saying.
there is. Yep, I saw it too. So,
And completely off track, Northern Ireland has just had the go ahead for a new circuit to be built. That probably cost of about $40 million. It looks quite a nice little circuit. I hope to get some sort of Category 2 FIA sanctioned events, World Touring Cars, British Touring Cars. It looks a great little circuit. Yeah, it'd be good.
Yeah, that's worth a pint right there. That's good news.
that's where the pint of Guinness, yeah. So, that being said, guys, you know what? I want to thank Whoobazoo Radio Network for hosting us. Thank you, iHeartRadio, for putting us out there. Guys, have a good night. We'll talk to you next week. Good night, everybody.
Drivers, start your engines!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there. I want you to be perfect.
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him, but he talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweat working for the man, alright. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Cool headed when the heat is on, yeah. Save my baby from the burning building. Take her home when the sprinklers on, alright.
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you. He rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.